Honestly, it's hard to believe it's coming up at the end of this year on 4 years since this device came out. It doesn't feel that long, and this thing revolutionized podcasting and, frankly, portable audio mixing. In so many ways, it brought accessibility of a studio-style console to an absolutely affordable point, well under $1,000 Australian. You've got sound pads or hotkeys, as I call them. You've got direct recording. You've got USB outputs. You've got multi-track. And it evolved over all that time. When it first launched, it didn't have multi-track. There's so much that's changed about this. But at its core, it really made it simple to create good quality audio because of the AFX processing on board and everything it did to essentially make it easier to record audio. And in that time, they've done a lot more. They've got this new PSA Plus mount. We've got these new beautiful NTH 100 headphones, which are the perfect headphone to have in this scenario. They're not for music listening. They're for studio recording like this. But then you've got to wonder, the competition in this space has been quite extreme. So you've got Tascam, you've got Zoom doing things. There's a lot going on in this space. So I think, obviously, Rode need to do something a little more. They need to turn the notch up. And let me tell you, I think they've done that. So I'm going to push this a little bit out of the way there, all right? Because I'm still recording the audio here on the pod mic, and I'm doing a backup recording on my camera, as you always should have backups and have plans in every way. But this is what's new. The Rodecaster Pro II. Now, let's take a look at what's inside and then talk broadly about what's new before we take a break and come back with a full review. So they've adopted Rode's very black and white boxing for every product you now have. And they, look, I gotta say straight out the bat, very smart here, advertising all of the great Rode stuff. And it says, welcome to next level audio. And that's what you get with the Rodecaster. Now in here, you'll have your local power cord. So obviously this is the Australian power cord, and each different region will have their own. And then in here, the beast itself, and underneath is the power. Let me clear the way here a little. Now, one notable thing already about the Rodecaster Pro II is this, USB-C power. So this is a much smaller power brick and it's USB-C powered. There's a couple of things about that which are interesting and you need to take note of. So the device itself, there it is. It has a familiar look, no doubt. It is a touch smaller in some ways and bigger in others. So it's not as wide. It is slightly taller, and it sits at about the same height, but now with this slightly more elevated screen. So you can see here, the screen now is much larger as we rip off the loveliness. This screen here is a 5.5-inch touchscreen. So it's bigger and brighter than the original. And it's just, essentially a redefined design. Now, a few things to note. Very clear headphone dials, and this rotary dial here is not your master output. I don't think I ever used that on the Rodecaster because I never outputted to speakers. This is actually a kind of way of interacting with things on the screen. So from setting the date to changing the settings to the finest detail of every single possible part of this, it's all done through this little rotary dial. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 faders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the original Rodecaster. So you think you've gone down. What they've done here is allowed you to customize. So basically in the settings here, we'll be able to plug whatever we want into the back and choose what appears down here. So essentially I can choose this to be USB, this to be the sound pads, this to be mic 1, this to be Bluetooth, this to be mic 3. You can manipulate the layout as best you like. So for those that want a different style layout, you might want to just control, for example, your call volume here and keep your microphone volumes at a certain level. You'll be able to see things like the actual levels appearing on screen, the actual faders digitally appear on screen, because these are obviously fully digital levels. The same buttons for configuration, the same solo and mute buttons, but the sound pads have also changed. So we've now got these directional arrows, because on the screen here, you'll be able to not only see your recording levels, the time, and the recording duration, but you can actually see the sound pad. So you can manipulate through the different sound pads and still stay on your home screen, understanding the recording duration, for example, which is one of the problems we have when we're flicking between multiple sound pads using the digital display on the current Rodecaster. And a single big record button over here, which operates essentially the same. A couple of things missing. There's no more front 3.5mm headphone jack. That's gone. There's also no TRRS. Now, for me, that's a big change because I use the TRRS weekly for my phone output. So I'm going to have to switch entirely to Bluetooth. I don't know why I never did that in the first place. It shouldn't create a difference for me, but it'll be interesting to see whether it does when I'm recording the callers to my Talkback podcast. You can see over here the four XLR input jacks are now kind of universal input. So you can now have your larger guitar, other inputs directly here instead of having to be an XLR because they were defined as XLR on the original Rodecaster. The same kind of outputs, 4 headphones on a left and a right, but over here, a lot different. USB-C power, and I can tell you straight away my first feedback to Rode was, but hang on a minute, that's going to come out. Now, it's actually quite hard to get out, so don't be too worried about that, but there's also Kensington lock down here, and I think you'll find there'll be an attachment you can get, if you're worried about that, to allow you to kind of loop around the USB and attach the USB-C cable a little bit better. Power button is just smaller and stranger, but here, there's your SD card, your Ethernet. So this is now Ethernet and Wi-Fi on board. And I can't even begin to talk about all that stuff and why, but essentially firmware upgrades for a start. But secondly, future features, phenomenal. We can worry about those down the track. And then 2 USB-C USB interactions. Now, those can be a simple output like you have today where you can create for your computer a stereo or a multi-channel input output. But also there's a USB chat function. I'm not sure I fully understand that yet, but essentially you can rig it up so that there's a chat function in your headphones from the USB. Probably not something I'm going to investigate in my review. I'm going to review this as a podcaster and a podcaster who does multiple shows. I do the EFTM podcast, Two Blokes Talking Tech, the best movies you've never seen, and the private feed of the Two Blokes, at least those 4 every week, if not more. And the difference is instead of having to load in all the hotkeys and all my stings across multiple pages and understand which page I'm on, you can now have show profiles. So we can save Two Blokes Talking Tech as a show, and when we load that show, those stings and jingles are there. When we load the best movies you've never seen, those stings and jingles are there for you, and you can just navigate through them. So instead of confusing your Rodecaster with lots and lots of content in one show, you've now got multiple profiles to do that in. It's a gorgeous looking unit. My understanding is it'll only be very slightly more expensive, maybe $100 in Australia more expensive than the predecessor. And I think for what you're getting, something magnificent. I'll just finally say before we go away and review the inputs here, these are more than just changed in terms of the way they operate. They're also Nutric inputs. So a Nutric combo input like this, plus the abilities that they've put on board means this is a cleaner and better quality input and a whole pass-through than you've ever heard before. On a Shure microphone, the SM78, whatever it's called, which is what I primarily use, I've never been able to pump the level to a point where I can sit back from the microphone. I've always had to really address the Shure microphone. With this, I'm able to pump the level, get clarity without getting interference. It's a game changer. So that's the Rodecaster Pro II. I'm going to go and record some shows, and I'll come back and give you my thoughts.